That was my only question was, how do we pronounce this name?
It's awkward when you mispronounce somebody's name when you have them on. That's bad. And when the ghosts open the door, that's bad too.
That's Justin coming in here to strangle me for that comment about Superman.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 494 of the Dead Robot Society. Terry Mixon here. Joining me, Paul E. Cooley. How you doing, man?
I live, I breathe, I write. That's what I do. That's how I am.
Paul E. Cooley, the musical.
You love my singing voice?
Sure.
We promised never to sing on this program again, and yet here I am.
Well, you say that now, but I hear that the episode 500 is going to be a musical.
Over your dead body.
Dead Robots, the musical.
No. Oh yeah, Paul and Terry wearing the flamingo girl outfits and kicking our legs up. Yeah, that's gonna happen. That's gonna happen. Oh, I ripped my nutsack.
Oh my God. I don't know how you're doing your dancing, but you're doing it wrong.
On that note.
Wow. I sure provoked a reaction that time.
Oh God, what is this? I'll learn to shut up. I'm doing good, man. I'm getting the writing done. I've been kind of lazy about putting on the spreadsheet, but getting the writing done. I've just been interfered with on all kinds of fronts, so I'm not writing as much as I'd like to, but I managed to get 750 words a day. I had trouble keeping track. So, because I forget to write down my word count that day, and then I've already written a whole bunch of shit the next day, and then it's like, what did I write yesterday? I don't know. So anyway, I need to go update that thing.
Yeah, I've been keeping it updated. The last few days have not been so great for me. I'm getting ready to fly out for the Nebula conference tomorrow, and the new kittens have been adding some chaos to our lives with all the feedings. So they've been eating up a fair chunk of time, but I haven't missed a day. Things are still going, even though the last couple of days, and today is almost going to certainly be the same. I'm just going to get about 300 words. It is what it is. When I get back from the conference, then I can really get into the motion. Last week, between the last time we talked and now, we wrapped up, Glenn and I wrapped up the draft of the novel we were working on together, and it's off to the copy editor. It's going to come out the middle of next month. So that project is off my table. So my decks are cleared to jump back into the Empire of Bones book Clan Wars that I'm working on. And I'm excited about that.
Yeah, you've been talking about that one for a while.
Yep, I'm totally into it. I upgraded my version of Dragon to version 15, and it seems more stable and even more accurate, which is shocking to me because it was already fairly accurate. So I really am looking forward to getting a good chance to give it a test drive and see if my word count really goes up, even from what I was getting.
I still have not tried doing that, and I'm still not really sure it will work. It'd be tough.
Tabitha Haddix, one of our listeners, said that that writes a good number of books. She's a lot more prolific word-wise than I am. Said that she got version 13 of Dragon and was giving it a test drive. And she said after 2 days, if anybody tried to take it from me, I'd fight to the death, or some variant of that. So there's something there. Somebody else is saying it's great. I would never go back. I'm totally convinced that for me is the way to go forward. It's a change in the way you do it. And like she did, if you buy version 13, it's $30 on Amazon. Not very expensive. You could certainly test drive the technology, and 13 was actually fairly functional, as I recall.
I'll consider it.
But you only have a Mac, don't you?
Yes, I only have a Mac.
I've heard that
I only had a Mac.
The Mac version of the software, and this is like totally backwards for most of the things, is noticeably inferior to the PC version.
That doesn't surprise me.
Apparently, Dragon bought a sound recognition software to make into theirs, but as of yet, it's still a different piece of software and it's not nearly as functional.
Right.
So you'd have to go through an emulation program to run like you're running Windows if you wanted to run one.
Very, very freaking slow.
And it would be. So that may not be for you. I did buy the version 4, 2 versions back of the Mac software, and I've got it on my Mac, but I haven't test driven it yet. It was cheap too.
May just try dictation. Enhanced dictation.
Do some research on the Mac side and see what pops up there. But the whole process of using dictation as opposed to writing it out has been very helpful to me. I don't think I would ever go back. I can certainly write with the keyboard, and I'm going to be writing with the keyboard over this next week on my travels, but I much prefer to do it by dictation.
Well, like I said, it's something I'll have to try at some point, but I don't know if I'd have to retrain how I see the words, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I totally was not one of those people that thought the dictation was going to be right for me, and I wrestled with it for a couple of books, but now it's totally there. I would not go back. Admittedly, I try not to edit as I'm writing, and I know you do. You change things as you're writing. I try to write a page full of stuff and then go back and read it again and change the things that I need to change and then pick back up writing at that point. Gotcha. Something that Dean Wesley Smith calls cycling.
That's
you
right.
Write forward in creative voice, hit the end of the page, go back, read through it, add words, change things, do what you're doing, hit the place where you stop and just kick right back into it and do another page. So when I get to the end of the book, I'm done. I am not making another pass back through it. I'm finished with that book. So my process is different than yours. So it lends itself to dictation. But still.
Things to think about. Things to think about, things to consider, things to try. People to kill.
Well, that's between you and the NSA.
Yeah, right. Have you seen my graveyard page? There's a lot of people signing up to die. That's the way that works.
Have you ever considered, using that in a novel where a serial killer goes to a writer that writes horror and finds their graveyard and starts hunting down the people on the graveyard and killing them? That's kind of a hat tip to the writer.
That would be such a derivative story.
Oh, there is no such thing as a derivative story. There's exciting and there's not exciting. Screw derivative.
I'm thinking of The Dark Half by Stephen King.
Not familiar with that hack.
Thad Beaumont was born with a twin, or not born, but gestated in the womb with a twin. He ended up dissolving the other twin, absorbing them. And what ended up happening was it created some kind of rift where he brought that other self to life through one of his characters. And, hilarity ensues.
And just like every other Stephen King novel.
Yeah, hilarity ensues.
Yeah, well, I actually talked about, writing this, in a non-hackneyed format. So, you wouldn't have to be, cliched like that King guy.
Oh, Terry. I have no idea what I'm going to do with you. No idea what I'm going to do with you. Hopeless. Absolutely hopeless.
It's sad to me because if I was saying that to Justin, if Justin were still among us, he would be frothing at the mouth.
He'd be howling at the moon and slavering with like bits of drool flying everywhere. Yes,
he would be. So I'm saying these things, expecting to get, some serious reaction. It's just, you're not up to snuff on this, buddy. You're gonna have to come to the next level on the anti-King stuff here. All right?
No. This is no point. I'm just not going to take the bait. I'm not a big enough fanboy to take that bait.
Yeah, that's probably true. Justin was a huge King fanboy.
Yeah. I'm not really sure I'm much of a fanboy of anything. Not sure. Used to be. not sure I am anymore. No, that's conversation for a different day.
You're so jaded.
It's not jaded, just more wiser.
Oh, is that what they're calling it these days?
Yes, that's what we're calling it these days.
Kids, who can understand them?
For crying out loud.
In any case, I'm glad to hear you're doing good. So let's jump into the meat of the show, because meat is the actually appropriate word. We're going to spell a little differently. We're going to meet, M-E-E-T, author Kacey Ezell, and hear from her about what's going on in her life. So let's go to that right now. And joining us today is author Kacey Ezell. Kacey, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
It is so much a pleasure. Why don't you go ahead and take a moment to introduce yourself to our audience, let them know who you are, what you write, what you do, especially what you do, because I think that's very exciting.
Okay. So my name is Kacey Ezell. I am a science fiction, military science fiction, fantasy, military fantasy, horror, noir, a couple of other things writer. I'm transgenre, as I coined myself at a recent con. For my day job, I'm an active duty Air Force helicopter pilot. I have a little over 2,500 hours in the UH-1N and Mi-17 helicopters. I've been in the Air Force since 1999, so that's 19 years. I'm married. I have 2 kids, 2 cats, and yeah, happy to be here.
Coincidentally, when I was in the Army 30 years ago, I was an OH-58 helicopter crew chief. So that's one of those weird things in life.
Yeah, small world.
Small world.
Yeah.
I ran into your name when I was participating in some of Chris Kennedy's 4 Horsemen anthologies.
Yes. So let's see. I first encountered Chris Kennedy through the anthologies too. I have a story in all 3 of the extant anthologies. I've also co-written a book called Assassin with Marisa Wolf, which is set in the 4 Horsemen universe. That came out in February. And Chris, on one of his additional imprints that's not 4 Horsemen related, he's also published my solo work, Minds of Men, which is a kind of an alternate history. It's basically the air war over Europe in World War II, but with psychics on board the bombers, and kind of seeing how that goes. So yeah, that's I love Chris. He's great.
He's a great guy. Great guy.
Yeah, he really is. He's really smart too. Like he seems to have, one of the things I've really appreciated about working with him is he's definitely seems to have cracked the code as far as best practices for using the micropress or self-published model with Kindle Direct Publishing, and all the way like even to things like audiobooks. Right now we're working with this fantastic narrator named Jennifer Jill Araya to produce an audiobook of Minds of Men. And he's just like, it's smooth sailing. He knows the ins and outs, and he's, whenever we talk about, okay, what's next, he's got strategies that are, that he can show, are proven strategies and stuff. So it's really been great for me as a relatively new author to be able to work with him and really sort of capitalize on his expertise.
I'm not sure how, but I ended up having a story in all 3 of the anthologies as well. So that worked out. That worked out well for me.
We should form a club.
We should. I already submitted the story idea for the next anthology and got back the thumbs up on that. So
yes, Lion's Den. That's exciting. Yeah, I'm. Go ahead.
I was just saying, I saw your description of the bar. That was amazing.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that was fun to do. I just sort of, I talked to the gentleman who inspired it. And did you know how that came about? Why it's the Lion's Den?
No, go ahead.
So this is a great story. So there's a guy by the name of, I'm going to mess his name up. His last name is Lyons, Lyons. And he is a fan of the 4 Horsemen universe. And Chris was going to redshirt him. And he said, well, instead of redshirting me as a person, why don't you redshirt my bar idea that I've had? And he came up with this idea of this Merc bar called the Lion's Den. And Chris loved it. And so when Chris contacted me and the other authors who have written novels in the universe and said, hey, we're going to do another anthology. Let me know if you want to participate. This is what the theme is. And I asked him, well, what does it look like? He said, I don't know. Talk to Lyons, see what he has to say. And so I sent him a message and got some input from him on kind of what he thought it would look like. And then I just sort of ran with that. So that's what we came up with.
It was an amazing description.
Thank you.
I could easily see how it worked in the mind, and it was very different visually than it was very firm visually. I could definitely see every aspect of it. That was awesome.
Well, that was what I was hoping, was just to give the authors something to kind of work with, so that they could, whether they set their story in that location or not, just so that there was something that was cohesive and unifying throughout the anthology. So
I asked Chris whether or not we needed to have part of the story set inside the bar, because I was curious how that was going to work. And he said, no, don't spend words on that. Write the story, not inside the bar. So
right.
Anybody that is thinking of submitting something to that, it's not going to actually take place in the bar.
Sure. No, the theme is, these are stories that are told in the bar. So I don't know. For me, it helps if I can contextualize things with a location like that. So I said it, I wrote it up mostly. I mean, I'd like to say I was doing it for everyone else, but really I was just doing it for my own purpose, so that I could work with it and then send it to Chris. So
I haven't read the synopsis for the anthology, but it sounds like if it's told in a bar, you're expected to be putting in hyperbole and BS into it, right?
I think the 10% rule applies, where it has to be at least 10% true. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because I'm actually sort of playing with an idea of for a story for that anthology that kind of works with that trope a little bit. So
I want to write something with a completely unreliable narrator. I think that would just be absolutely hilarious to do it that
or
way.
One of those, well, that's not how I heard it. I heard it like this, where you get like the same anecdote told like 4 times.
Yeah, I do it. I would do it in the first person though. So you just then you don't hear who he's talking to, but you can hear him defend his position. It would
come on now. No, Paul, here's what I think you need to do for that.
Oh no, here we go.
Go ahead and you tell the story like it's happening in the here and now. And then right in the middle, you have somebody chop right into it. Oh, that's bullshit. That did not happen. And suddenly he's having to defend himself to this other person and then back into the story.
Right. Yeah. That would be fun. I'm really, really hoping that at least one of the stories gets, that makes the anthology starts with a rabbi, a priest, and a, whatever.
Walk into a bar.
Walk into the bar, right? Yeah.
We totally started an episode with that like 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was the Archetypes and Stereotypes.
It was the Archetypes and Stereotypes show that we did. Yeah. I've got Assassin on my reader. I just haven't gotten around to it. So
I hope you enjoy it.
I'm sure that I will.
Yeah.
I'm sure that I will. Transgenre. When Chris recommended you to come on the show, he mentioned how you were the most genre fluid author he knew.
Yes, genre.
And I had no idea what that meant.
It means that I am very frustrating for him, because I won't settle down and just pick something and stick with it.
Commit, damn it, commit.
Right. Yeah, no. I want to tell all the stories, all of them.
You're not the only one that has that problem, trust me.
Well, and from a creative standpoint, it's not a bad problem to have. But I think that somewhat from a marketing standpoint, it is, I can see why it would be very frustrating for him. When I have 2 novels out, one of which is an alternate history of World War II, essentially. And the other one is basically a murder mystery featuring cat-like alien assassins set in a military sci-fi universe. So my Kindle also bought bar down at the bottom of my Amazon page is all kinds of crazy, so trying to target the marketing the way that smart authors do is I think challenging for me. But I'm going to keep writing what I like, because that's how it turns out good. So
absolutely. I mainly write space opera. and I enjoy writing it, but I've also written a post-apocalyptic novel, and I've got an urban fantasy that's going to come out later this year under my own name, and I just don't care. It's stuff that I like reading, and my readers are smart enough to figure out whether or not this book that's coming out from me is to their taste or not. I'm not going to try to freak them out by, I don't know, subdividing it, trying to make a pen name. I'm not going to go there.
Right.
They'll figure it out.
I mean, and for some people, you know, for some authors, that's the right choice. The other thing is I'm kind of taking a page out of John Ringo's book. John is a good friend and a mentor of mine. And we're actually collaborating on a project for Baen too. And I have learned so much from writing with him. And he's all over the place too, you know, everything from what is sort of science fiction, but reads like fantasy when you talk about his Council Wars series, and, you know, to the Pauline stuff, the military science fiction stuff, to the techno thriller ghost stuff. I mean, you know, John is also genre fluid. So
I love John's work. I've interacted with him a few times on Facebook and whatnot. He just needs to finish something. Damn it, they're all hanging out there.
This coming from you? He's planning on writing like 25,000 books in Empire of Bones. This coming from you?
I'm specifically thinking of the Council War, since he basically, I think he said that he had no idea how he was going to take it from where he had it to go on from there. It's been years. I would love to see it or some more Polscene books, but gosh darn, it's been forever. So he'll get around to them whenever the muse strikes him to get back to them. He will.
He will. And it's so funny because, you know, that's a very common complaint among his fans, but everything that he puts out, people love, you know, and it all has that inimitable John Ringo stamp, which is what I'm hoping that, so I'm hoping that people will also love our collaboration for that same reason. So we'll see.
I think they will. His fan base is a discerning group that I'm a member of. So I'm sure that they will.
Well, I hope you're right. And thank you for your positivity.
Come on, Paul, jump in here. You're just sitting there like a log.
Well, I was waiting for her to finish her story, and you started it.
I talk a lot. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Cool. You're fine. That's usually my problem. I think I guess the question is, have you thought at this point, have you started any series of your own, or are these all standalone books? Well,
so Minds of Men, the World War II story, is projected to be a 3-book series. I'm working on the second book right now. The first book was set in World War II. The second book will be set in the early days of the Cold War, starting like the kickoff event for it is the beginning of the Berlin airlift. And then the third book, I'm planning, let's put it that way, because I haven't actually put any words down on it. But I'm planning for that to be a Vietnam story, which I'm actually really excited about, because then I get to write about my Huey, you know. So it's one of the things that was really fun about writing Minds of Men was that I really got to dig into, I kind of got to unite two of my passions, because I got to write about aviation and combat aviation and sort of got to really dig in and do some research on really what it was like for those crews to fly in B-17 missions over occupied Europe. And the answer is it was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. There was a book called Combat Crew that was written by a flight engineer on B-17 who was flying missions out of Ridgeway Airfield in England. And it was basically his war diary that I think either he or his children put together, compiled, and had published after, many years after the war. And what he wrote about was so visceral, and it had that authenticity of what they call soldiers' tales in the quote unquote literary canon. I learned about this in college. One of my favorite courses that I took in college was a course called Literature of War, and one of the things that they talked about is that it's not always written by veterans, but most of the time they are. These quote unquote soldiers' tales will have that ring of authenticity when you talk about these extremes of human experience, such as combat situations. And this had that, and you could, when you read this man's description of what these missions were like, it was just so viscerally impactful. And that was really, what's the word I'm trying to look for here? it was meaningful to me to read that. And even though I'm not a bomber pilot, but it's still somewhat my professional heritage, just as a military aviator in general. And so to be able to take that and then work that into, another one of my passions, namely writing and stories, and kind of unite those two things. That was one of the things that really was one of my favorite aspects of that project. And I'm looking forward to doing that again with, probably not as much with the second book, but definitely with the third book. So.
Well, don't you think at that point when you I mean, you've got a couple books in the same series, that does give you a certain amount of identity there, especially if people know there's going to be a third and fourth book there.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. I just have to get them written first.
That's usually the rub right there. Yeah.
I think that's another reason why Chris gets frustrated with me as my publisher, because I currently have, I'm almost embarrassed to say, I currently have 5 novels that I'm actively working on right now. And several of them are collaborations. So when I say actively working on, sometimes I mean like my co-author is working on it right now, and then I plan on getting to it as soon as they pitch it back over to me, But that's a lot, and it's probably a little more scattered than I should be. I find it impossible to say no to a really cool project idea, and that's something I need to work on.
Terry's having that problem with anthologies. He wants to write all the stories in everybody's universe.
Oh, I have the same problem. And they're so fun. And I really like the short story format too. Well, for one thing, it's easier for me to, a lot of people say shorts are harder for them than novels, but for me, I guess it's just easier to think in like a self-contained vignette, which you can, throw out there in, 6,000, 8,000 words, 10,000 words, something like that. Whereas, to try and develop a storyline over 90, 100,000 words, that takes a little bit more doing. And I'm kind of a big fan of instant gratification. So for me, that's what short stories are. You can quickly, throw this thing out there and get out the story and, hopefully create the emotional reaction in the audience that you're going for. And then you get you get that instant gratification. So, but I mean, I've loved working on my novels too. They've been a lot of fun. It's just a longer process. That's all.
I think I've been ruined. I don't even know if I can write a short story anymore.
Oh, I'm sure you'll do fine. Of course, your idea of a short story might be 30,000 words.
Shut up. Leave me alone. Leave me alone.
I know that when I started out writing, I came into this backwards, and I started writing basically serialized novels first.
Sure.
And I didn't get into writing short stories until way later in my writing education. And I still don't associate as much with the short stories as I do with the novelizations. I just want to get down in the characters and stay with them for a while. I can't write a standalone novel. It just is never going to happen because their stories are never done.
Right.
You were talking about the war stories. I'll toss this out for the listeners as well. One of the books in that same vein that I found exceptionally impactful when I was growing up was a book called Warfish by George Gritter and Lydell Sims. George Gritter was a submariner in World War II, and it was the story of the World War II in the submarine service, and it influences me today.
I would really like to check that out, because that's a part of the war that I know almost nothing about. I'm fairly well versed in the aviation war and in the war in the Pacific, because when I was a kid, my parents were stationed in the Philippines for a couple of years, and we learned a lot about the war in the Pacific, obviously being over there and getting to see some of those sites and stuff. But yeah, that's not something I'm familiar with. I'll check that out. Thank you.
George Gritter was, I think, at the end of the war, he was either the executive officer or the commander of one of the submarines. I think it was the USS Flasher, which is a fish, not something else, you perverts. And
I didn't even put those two things together until you said something about
it.
And he documents his journey in becoming a submariner at the beginning of the war, all the way through the end of the war, 6 or 7 combat missions, combat tours of the submarine, and all of the big characters that he interacted with. And it's written like a story of someone that's there. It's written as a personal narrative.
Sure.
Because he was the one that served, and Lydell Sims was the writer that actually took what happened to him and made it into a story.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah.
And it is in reprints. I bought a new copy for myself just a couple of months back, so it's available as a reprint at this point in time, so you don't have to go hunt for the 1950 some odd version.
Right. Right.
One of the classes I took was the history of Vietnam, the Vietnam War, as told through fiction. And it started out, the first story was set in 1948, and it went all the way to 81, 82. I don't remember. So we read fiction from three different, maybe it was four different cultural perspectives, and basically covered all of that other stuff in between there. And it was really fascinating because the course gave you what was going on in the war at the time that this book is set. You know, what were the historical things that were influencing this, that, and the other, or when the stories were set. And it really gave you a feel for how important that history was to understand how things got from where they were in 48 to, you know, the end of the Vietnam conflict.
Sure.
And it was really, really fascinating. I think that those kinds of courses, and those kinds of books, if you're trying to write in military sci-fi or something like that, could just be absolutely amazingly helpful.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, just writing in general. There was in that same course, we read a short story collection by a guy by the name of Tim O'Brien, who's well known for his Vietnam fiction.
The things they carried.
The things they carried, right. And there was a story in there called How to Tell a True War Story.
Yes.
And
it's a nice essay. It's a very nice essay.
It's a fantastic essay. And one of the things that I remember reading this as a college student and realizing that what he was talking about not just how to tell a war story, but how to tell impactful fiction. Because the truth is, you can't just report the facts. That's not fiction, even if it's facts that didn't really happen. What you have to do is you have to make your audience feel something. And if you just say, this man went and he stepped on a landmine and it exploded, and, you know, he was eviscerated and amputated, and, you know, parts of his body flew up into the tree. That's not the same thing. You're not making your reader feel, just as you are if you say, you know, my buddy took a step and then the setting sun came out of his chest and he flew up into the air like a bird. You know, it's obviously the setting sun didn't come out of his chest, but that's what it looked like. And it evokes that feeling. And that is the essence of being a writer. And interestingly, also being a poet. My master's degree is in creative writing poetry, and I use that same essay to really sort of punctuate that idea of when you're choosing your language, you do so with the intent of evoking certain emotions, which is true, I think, in poetry and in prose.
One of the things that I've picked up in my very short career as a writer is that to have an impactful story, it's not just a retelling of facts and events. It's filtering those through the perceptions of the character, through the emotions of the character, and through the senses of the character.
Mm-hmm.
And when stories do those things, then they become the type of deep things that grip you.
Right. Well, and you know, we were talking about unreliable narrators earlier. That is one of the things that I think as a writer and also as a reader is some of the most fun to play with, because when you're telling a story through the point of view of a character, and then midway through the story, you realize that this character, their view of things does not necessarily match up with the reality around them. That just completely twists your mind, because what else do you have to go on? You're seeing through their eyes, you're feeling their emotions, you know? And that is one of the things that I really like to play with as a writer. Because again, I think it provides an interesting experience for the reader, which is, you know, what we're getting paid to do, right? So
this is totally veering off of topic, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway, because that's how this rolls. Years and years and years ago, I read the novelization of the very first Superman movie, the Christopher Reeve Superman movie. The plot in the book had zero to do with the movie. completely unrelated in any form or fashion. And it was told from the point of view of Lex Luthor.
Oh, fun.
And it was so fun watching the story unfold from his point of view as opposed to Superman's point of view, and seeing everything colored by his take on everything.
Right.
That made that book it's still 40 years later, it's still stuck.
I was going to say, I was born that year. It's not that old.
I'm 50 some odd years old. I didn't read it.
Terry can't do maths.
I can't do maths. Maths is hard.
But I fully agree with you. My second book in my Psyche of War, that's the name of the series that Minds of Men, my World War II story, is the first book of. The second book in that series, the one that starts with the Berlin airlift, the protagonist of that story is the antagonist of the first book. She's a German psychic. And we are now seeing this emergence of the Cold War and the Iron Curtain, and it's essentially going to be like a spy thriller, but through her eyes and her reaction to the end of the war and all that kind of stuff. So that's been fun to do too, to kind of make that mental shift and try to make her sympathetic. It's interesting making an ex-Nazi sympathetic.
It's going to be interesting, particularly in this day and age. The word Nazi gets tossed around, and it evokes all kinds of emotions that aren't even the same kinds of emotions that were raised during the actual conflict itself. It's interesting.
I know.
Times
change. I know, and I'm bracing myself for some of that fallout. But I'm hoping that by sticking to the story and keeping it in a historical context where she literally was a member of the Nazi Party until the end of the war. But I'm hoping that if I can portray her as, human beings are complex, and I'm hoping that if I can convey that complexity, that I can still make her a sympathetic character. We'll see. If the book just completely tanks, then we know that I'm not as good as I think I am.
People from that era did find redemption. I mean, you look at Werner von Braun and how he founded our space program, whereas he worked on the Nazi rocket program.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I read this really interesting book about that whole program called Operation Paperclip, and pretty fascinating stuff. Kind of damning in a lot of cases, actually, but really well written. I wish I could remember the author's name off the top of my head, but I can't. She's I think she's an investigative journalist. Writes a lot of these, goes back and looks at historical events and programs and things that we maybe didn't know a lot about, and kind of digs into them and stuff.
So a spy thriller after a war novel. That's changing genres in midstream right there.
A little bit. But some of the themes will carry over, though. Kind of the major theme of Minds of Men, it was that, the main character is a psychic, and through her experiences flying with, these crewmen on board the B-17, and then when they get shot down and have to escape, captured by the antagonist and her crew of soldiers, and then working through the resistance lines in occupied Europe to escape. One of the themes that just kind of ran through the whole thing is that you really have to depend on the people who are around you. You really have to become a crew or a family or whatever. And without those connections, you're not going to be as successful. And so I'm going to revisit that theme with Lena with in the second book, but come at it from a different angle and kind of explore it that way. So
one of the things that I remember Chris mentioning, and we'll see if I actually remember it correctly here, is that you were writing a post-apocalyptic YA science fiction novel with romance themes. Did I remember that right? Yes.
I don't know how YA it's going to actually end up being. So the post-apocalyptic science fiction with romance themes is a that's the collaboration I spoke about with John Ringo. That is, it's actually me, another author by the name of Chris Smith, and the two of us are working with John to write this in this universe where essentially giant ants and quote unquote dragons that are really more like pterodactyls invade from an alternate dimension, and they're electrovoric, so they eat all the electricity. And there's this big war, and all of the hydroelectric power plants get invaded by the bugs, and then destroyed by nukes. And our story comes in 30 years later, so that's the post-apocalyptic piece of it. But when we say there are romance themes, it's not so much romance themes as there is some romance within the storyline. We have a young character who meets with a young female character, and they like each other a lot, and they're very awkward and sweet about it. But I would say it's more about connection, like various forms of connection, not just romantic connection, but also, the deep friendship connection, the bond between, people who go through extreme experiences together, just like the bond between brothers in arms or brothers and sisters in arms. When you go through something incredibly intense, such as a combat situation, or running from giant ants or what have you, that those experiences are going to bring you together, and that's something that's kind of fascinating to me, actually. So that's something that Chris and John and I explore a little bit in that series, or in the first book in that series.
For the record, as everyone that watches this show knows, I'm a huge fan of the romance genre anyway. So saying romantic elements does not necessarily mean that I was looking down on that, because I think those are awesome.
Oh no, and I'm a huge romance fan too. I mean, that's what I read. That's my comfort read. Is I'll go grab a Nora Roberts or whatever. And I think it's funny that there is a little bit sometimes of a stigma against writing romance. I clarified, because in this particular case, the point of the story, the object of the story, was not that the characters get together. It was that they accomplish some other goals, which for me is sort of the dividing line. I was actually working with another friend of mine who has written a terrific, really, really detailed and interesting and very, very cool space opera universe. And she sent me her novel that she wrote in it. And she had intended to submit it to a couple of publishers, the big one being Baen, right? And Baen publishes science fiction and space opera. And I know that that's something that they're interested in doing more of. And my critique with her was, okay, you need to figure out, what is this story? Is it a romance or is it a space opera? Because right now, because of the way you have all the conflict resolving, it reads like a romance. It reads like a very good romance. But Baen's not going to buy a romance, because that's not what their market is. If you want it to be a space opera, you need to have things, you can still have this, all of the things that form the resolution of your story, they can all be there still, but they can't be the resolution of the story. The resolution of the story has to occur in a different realm. Not that the characters get together, but what are the ramifications of the characters getting together? How does that affect the world? Since it's space opera, how does it affect the political situation of the world around them? Instead, make that the resolution of your story, and then I think you'd have something that that they might be interested in. So,
Yep, I know that I'm a huge Nora Roberts fan. I'm not necessarily of the romances by themselves, but I like the ones that are more crime thrillerish romances that she.
Oh
does.
yeah, her J.D. Robb line.
No, I read J.D. Robb as well, but I'm talking about every once a year she'll have one where it's a romance, but there's a murder involved.
Sure.
Those are the ones those are the ones that I really love of hers.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because again, people are snooty about romance, but I'm like, man, have you looked at their bottom line? I mean, you want to talk about what sells. People like emotions, and humans are interested in emotions, and yeah. So I'm not snobby about romance either.
Paul, he's a snob.
I am not. I am not.
But defend yourself, bearded one.
Nor is there anything wrong with not writing it. If it's just, if that's not where your stories lie, that's not where your stories lie. I'm into the emotional aspect of characters and character interactions. So, I sometimes have some pretty heavy, I shouldn't say heavy, but I write about that stuff, and I would have no problem writing a romance novel. Maybe
I think the stigma comes from the fact that everybody was basically just following the same formula for so long. And I think that was the problem is they were marketing the formula and everything else was Harlequin, right?
Sure.
It's just basically it became a joke in and of itself, and so basically that kind of filtered out to the rest of the romance genre. I think
sure, yeah. If it's if a story's formulaic, it's formulaic, regardless of whether it's a romance formula or a sci-fi formula or a fantasy formula or whatever. Formulaic is formulaic, and formulaic done well with good window dressing can sometimes be okay.
The formula, if you don't see the formula for what it is, then it was done correctly.
Right, but if you feel like you've read it before, and then you're not going to be interested. And I'll agree with that. And there is some of that in the romance genre, but there's that in sci-fi too.
I'm not discounting that. I'm saying I think that's where the stigma comes from.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think one of the things about romance is that it is fairly constrained because the ending has to be the happy ever after or the happy for now. If it's not that, then it's not a romance. So you pretty much know with something that's technically romance, people that don't read it think they know what that entails. And they don't realize that it's not the ending that matters. It's the journey to get there. It's the emotional development and how the characters mesh together and finally bond that is the story, not how it ends.
But it's the same thing. I mean, I agree with you, and I would make the same argument, for mystery stories. You know how it's going to end. Mm-hmm. They're going to figure out who done it. I mean, wouldn't be much of a mystery if it didn't. The thing that's so interesting about it is you want to read it to see how they figure it out, who done it. And so, it's the same thing. It's the journey that's important. But again, I mean, I think it's the journey that's important in a fantasy story too.
I agree.
No, any story really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, why else bother reading it?
Exactly.
Well, you see, there's this really cool robot that goes around and does stuff.
Oh no!
Does he have any emotions? No. Okay. Are you going to filter it through the robot? Yes. Good luck.
So tell me, Paul, how did that work out with you for AUV5?
Oh my God! How did it work out for the lanternfish? I get comments all the time. I had to do for the black.
That was one of your most favorite characters.
Yes.
And it wasn't even sentient.
No, it wasn't sentient. That was just a blast following that down there, because it was a device to convey information to the reader that the characters would have no access to.
Sure.
But I wanted to use that to create suspense and also throw in some facts while I was at it, which was a lot of fun because I had a lot of research to play with. But people to this day are like, when are you bringing back AUV5? When are you going to write another scene with lanternfish? Because it was just, I told it as creepily as I possibly could, and it worked really well. But those little moments are just so much fun in anything that you write. It doesn't matter what the genre is. Those little moments serve as good breaks in between things. And how did we get on this topic, Terry? Yeah, you said something about AUV5.
Hey, as a squirrel, it dragged me over there.
Well, yeah, the emotions. You hopefully got if you write something like that. I guess the point of the emotional is to get them attached to that point of view, or how it's conveyed and everything else. But there were other things. I did give that particular robot, so to speak, a personality of its own, because something was always breaking down on it.
Oh yeah.
So, but it ended up being very, very important to the end of the book, which I didn't even see coming when I started it. So,
sure,
go figure.
Sure. Yeah.
So, Kacey, are there any things that you put in your stories, any quirks that are yours that you think of as your signature that just makes the story yours?
So my co-author Chris Smith would tell you that I really like the phrase his, her, their, whatever, lips curved in a small smile. I'm always having people's lips curve.
Yeah. I've got a lot of nodding and everything else and all of that. And it's a real problem.
Let's see. Something that's sort of signature mine. Sometimes I'll throw in like tiny little inside jokes that, maybe one person is going to get. and I'm trying to think of I know I've done this. I'm trying to think of an example recently. Like, oh, okay, I got one for you. So Chris and I, again, this was something that Chris Smith and I did in the book that we're collaborating with John on. We have a very good friend who is a very, very smart gentleman, really well read, a phenomenal bartender, and I don't even drink, and I know that. But he's we were at LibertyCon one year, and we were hanging out, and this was the same year that Chris and John and I like got started in this project, and we were actually brainstorming on a totally different path, not even talking about this project, but we were talking about interesting historical characters. And this friend of mine, a great guy by the name of Nathan, was like, you guys, you need to talk about William Marshall. And we're like, okay, who's William Marshall? And he proceeds to tell us about this, I think 12th or 13th century, 12th century. Yeah. Anyway, this knight he was a contemporary of Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine, and he was essentially this like perfect medieval knight, right? And the paragon of all of the virtues of the age, and yada yada yada. And full confession, this was late at night at LibertyCon, so a couple of drinks had been consumed by everybody who drinks, right? And including Nate. And he waxes eloquent about this guy, and we're like, cool, he's awesome, yeah. And so we start talking about something else, and he's like, but it gets better. And he keeps going about how awesome William Marshall is, and we're like, okay, Nate, that's cool. Yeah, we like him when he's in. Let's talk about someone else. And he's like, no, but there's more. It gets better. And like for like over an hour, my dear friend just would not shut up about how cool William Marshall was. And so in the book that Chris, when Chris and I were writing the beginning of it, before we sent it to John, we included a scene where there's a gentleman named Bad Bill Marsh, and he is, touted as this paragon of all these martial virtues, and he gets his butt kicked by our character, which is a joke that now you guys know, and Nate will know, and pretty much no one else will get.
That's awesome. So in my space opera, it's set way, very, very far future, after basically a major calamity virtually destroys humanity, but they're still in space. And part of what the main characters have found over their adventures is a lot of detailed knowledge about Earth. And one of the characters has fallen in love with films from our era. So I'm always dropping in film elements from our era into this far future science fiction, and having people go, what is she talking about?
Yeah, we've done that too. Yeah, that's a lot of fun too, to make references that the audience is going to get, but the characters can't for whatever reason. Yeah.
I would never do something like that in my books. I would never do something like that. Put inside jokes in between the podcast listeners and the fiction. I would never do that. I have never done that. Oh yes, I have. Oh yes. That's why Thomas Reid dies in every book. Well, he doesn't die. You just find his corpse. So, toe tag treed.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm a big fan of introducing strong female characters. And as soon as I do, they take over the story, because for whatever reason, emotionally, they just speak stronger to me. And that's where I tell my stories from, for the most part. And I like taking characters that are perhaps not warriors. The main character in the series that I have, Princess Kelsey, she is not a fighter. Mm-hmm. But because of incidents in the story, she's basically turned into a physical warfighting machine using technology that they can't even understand. And so she has to adjust to that throughout the entire series of books, trying to grow into how life has changed her. And it's always fun looking at that character's emotions and how she sees the world, because it's a very unique lens to go through.
Sure.
I think grading those characters are what gives the story its longevity. I think that's what brings that. I think that's what makes them interesting, is when they're thrown into a situation that they are just absolutely not prepared for at all.
Right. Oh, I fully agree. And there's this woman warrior archetype. And I think part of the reason why people are so interested in that is that, for most of history, with very few exceptions, women were not really fulfilling the role of the warrior, at least not the warrior for the state, whatever form the state was taking. And I think people are interested in that because there is a dichotomy there of, how does this make someone different? How does that change their outlook?
I think Escape Pod had a story about that where they had genetically modified or behaviorally modified women because they figured out that as long as women had that maternal instinct turned up to 11 and the state was essentially their child, then they would just absolutely roll over the enemy, which they apparently did, but they all came back just jacked up completely. And I think that was Escape Pod where I heard that story, and I don't remember who wrote it, obviously, but it was fantastic.
Yeah, you don't want to F with Mama Bear. Let's put it that way.
Exactly. But I thought it was really interesting that the author went into that, but it was basically a halfway house for those who had been were in the process of being rehabilitated, if you will.
Interesting. That would be interesting. Yeah.
The character that I have in mind, she was isolated from her home world with the story. Everybody in the story was isolated by geography from their home systems for 4 books. So on book 5, they arrive back home, and the people there pretty much totally they underestimate her. They haven't seen the changes that she's been through, and that's a lethal miscalculation for them in the end. Because it's fun watching those characters' preconceptions of the person they thought they knew be used against them viciously.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, that would be fun. That would be fun. So I'm gonna have to read your book now.
Don't do it. Don't do it, because then you'll have to read the next one and the next one and the next one, and then it just lies madness.
It just never does. It just never ends. But that's good, though, right?
Much.
I like to think
it's
so.
horrible.
I like to think so. I've definitely gotten better since book 1. I will say that.
Who hasn't, right? So right now, Chris and I mentioned we're doing the working with a narrator to produce an audiobook of Minds of Men, and I'm getting the chapters as she records them, and I'm listening to them, and she's fantastic, and I'm happy with the story, but there's still, every once in a while, there's like, oh, I just used that word. Why did I use it again? Like 2 sentences later, what was I thinking? All of these things that you don't think about until like later down the road when you've matured as an author or whatever. So
I've done the same thing. Veronica Giguere narrates the audio for me, and the way we had been doing it is I was getting the chapters back, and I'm just like, oh no, I should have changed that. I should have done these other things.
Yeah.
And thankfully now we're using an outside source to go ahead and do the production and proofing. So someone else will be listening to it to make sure that it's all good, and I don't have to go, oh no.
Which you will do if you ever hear any of your writing read aloud.
I don't even listen to the show after we record it, much less listen to my own audiobooks.
Oh, well, try recording them. Yeah, it's
but
bad.
I love doing readings. Like, I love doing readings at cons and stuff. That's always a really good time. So I don't know.
Yeah, the readings are fun. I mean, I've been podcasting my fiction for over 10 years now. So and I've only used an outside audiobook narrator twice. Everything else has been me reading. So I'm used to going that way, and I actually write with the idea of it being read aloud. I think I just do that subconsciously now. So you do end up learning that you have some really bad habits, and they're brought to your attention, and you don't catch them during editing. You don't catch them. Nobody catches them, but then you catch them when you listen and go, who wrote this crap? And then you go back and you change the sentence, and then it doesn't, but now you've changed the audiobook, so it's better than the actual book.
Right.
And they don't sync up with Audible, and people get very upset with you. And well, okay, but it makes me happy.
Yeah. We thought about we thought about me reading Minds of Men for the audiobook, but I'm really glad we decided not to. We decided not to because I am so like ADD with my projects and I have so many things on tap right now. But the narrator that we ended up hiring she's so good. She is the voice of my characters and she really brings them to life. And I'm really, really grateful to be working with her. And plus she has the expertise to do all the mastering and stuff, which I don't, and I don't have a professional setup and anything. So it was the right call to have her do it. But I have heard several authors and publisher Tony Weisskopf actually from Baen Books recommend that authors should read their books out loud to themselves during editing, because you hear so much more, you catch so much more when you hear it, performed out loud. So I'll start doing that now.
Find that really helpful for shorter works, especially.
Yeah, sure.
Especially where the voice just has to be so consistent
right
all the way through it. So yeah, it does make a difference. It's definitely something I would recommend as well.
I used to do that. I no longer listen to, I used to have Microsoft Word read it back to me so that I could do that. But now I've moved to where as I write, every page or so, I'll cycle back and read through it again to fix the little typos and add or tweak a detail. And by the time I get to the end of the book, I'm done with the book, which suits my personality well, because then I can move on to the next book.
Right.
But it's not right for everybody. Not right for everybody.
Terry likes to abandon things immediately. Yeah, I'm done with you. Kicked it to the curb, start on the next thing.
I kind of do too, and I'm trying to be better about having a more full editing period where it's not just, okay, let me go through and fix all the typos, where I'm like, no kidding, going through. And because I edit as I go. I'm not it's really interesting. Mark Wandry, who is a phenomenal writer, he's the original creator of the Four Horsemen universe. And, of course, Chris Kennedy came along and the two of them developed it together. But the original idea was Mark's. And he's a great writer. His style is completely different. And the two of us are working together on a story set in Four Horsemen universe right now called Weaver. And it's been a lot of fun, but it's really interesting because we have almost opposite styles of writing. Mark is let me get it all down on paper and then I'll go back and fix it in post-production kind of writer. Whereas I edit as I go, and so it's, it hasn't been difficult. It's just been, it's just been interesting to work together because I see how he does it and I see how I do it. And they're not the same, so it's kind of a learning experience, which is good and fun.
Working with somebody else is always an interesting sort of thing.
Yeah. And I do a lot of it for some reason. Lately I was thinking about it, and I wrote Assassin with Marisa, which was great. Marisa is a very old friend. Well, she's not old. Our friendship is old. We've been friends for a very long time, and we've written together for the entirety of our friendship. So I invited her to come in on the Assassin project because I thought she would be a great asset, and I thought I could get it done quicker if I, worked with someone, which we did. We got it done very quickly. And that was a great experience. But, we had practice writing together. We'd done that before. Writing with Chris Smith was pretty new to both of us. That was the first time both of us had ever collaborated on a really large project. Actually, no, I take that back. Chris had done something with Jason Cordova prior to that. And then of course we're also collaborating with John, which, John is the senior author. So essentially the way that works is, we do most of the draft and then he goes back in and polishes it and makes it a John Ringo story. You know what I mean? So, so that's kind of how that one worked. And what I'm learning, as I work with Chris and Mark and the other Chris and, is that every collaboration is individual. Even different projects with the same person, they're going to be individual. And the way, the flow that you work with them is going to be individual. One of the other projects that I'm working with someone on is a guy by the name of Griffin Barber, who also, he wrote 1636 Mission to the Mughals, for Bane.
Love that
with
book.
Barrett Flint. Yeah, Griffin is a fantastic writer. He's so good. And I really enjoyed working with him because I felt like he pushed me to be better, you know? And so the two of us are working on a sci-fi noir story right now that is like 90% done. And we're in the wicked 10% of, you know, where you're just trying to push to the finish and get it to where it needs to be, which is not my favorite part of the process at all. But Griff's fantastic, and it's been so fun to work with him. And I really have. I've gotten a lot better over the course of doing that with him. So
the first collaborative work that I had, I've only done collaboration with one author, Glenn Stewart. He writes science fiction as an indie, and he's got a much bigger audience than I do. So I was very pleased when he approached me to do this. He had found one of his books that he wrote 10 years ago that he said the bones of it are good, but I think it could be expanded to be 2 novels and be made better. And so he said, co-writer, here you are. Go ahead and go through it from the beginning and expand it as need be to make it 2 books. And so that was what I had to do, going through that and taking what was his voice and trying to stay true to it while still elaborating, expanding, and adding things. And now we're writing more books in that same universe, but it's not pre-written. So what he decided to do is he's writing the first 20,000 words, I'm writing the middle 40, and then he's writing the last 20, which is a totally different experience.
Yeah.
Doing the rest.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not sure how. I mean, obviously, it depends on the personalities and the story involved. But whoops, just lost my headphones. Both of them. 1 second, sorry guys. There we go.
How are you collaborating with these folks? Are you guys working on? Are you splitting it up that way? Or is there, you know, how exactly are you doing that?
So Mark and I with Weaver are essentially splitting it up scene by scene, and I have one particular protagonist, main character, POV character that I'm writing all of the scenes through her eyes, and then Mark's pretty much taking everyone else in the story that has a POV scene, whether that be the other main protagonist or, you know, some side characters that we see a couple of things through their eyes. And that's worked out well for us. For Marisa and I, when we did Assassin, there were 4 main characters and 4 storylines that kind of interconnected and wove in with one another. And so we split them up 2 and 2. So I wrote 2 storylines, she wrote 2 storylines. And then once those were complete, we, in Scrivener, because we both liked Scrivener, we would, you know, weave them together and do this scene from this character, this scene from this character. And that's how we structured the book and chapterized it. With Chris Smith, what do we do? I guess we broke it up by scene too. You know, like I would say, okay, I want to talk about this chunk where the characters are in this place and they're doing this thing, and you know, and then he would pick it up and do, you know, okay, well, I want to talk about this scene where they have this encounter. And then, like I said, we did the draft and then we sent it to John, and John is currently going over it, adding magic fairy dust, as he calls it, where, you know, he's what's the word? Redditing, WREDIT, writing and editing. So redditing it all together. And then with Griffin, again, we had two points of view protagonists, and so I took one point of view, he took another point of view, and then there's a couple of other like POV interludes that we're sort of swapping in and out on. Yeah. So, but like I said, you know, it's for each collaboration, you kind of got to figure out what your workflow is going to be, you know, early on, and how you're going to tackle that. Because, you know, the reality is you have different voices. And so you either have to find a way to make the voices very much the same or make it okay for them to be different. And with Griff and I, it's been very cool, you know, with this sci-fi noir story, that the character he's written has a very distinctive voice, and the character that I've written has a very distinctive voice, and they're not alike, but that's fine because it works with the character, it works in context. So
I think one of the reasons that doing it the way Glenn and I are doing it is because it's only a single point of view character.
Sure.
The point of view never shifts. So we have to at least be similar enough to where the reader can't discern reliably which one of us is actually touching it.
Yeah, and that would be difficult. I haven't attempted that yet, so good luck.
We've done 2 books this way before. I think we'll manage.
I know. I'm sure you're fantastic at it. I didn't mean that to sound snobby.
I didn't take that as that at all. No, it is a challenge, and it is a good luck sort of thing of making that happen, because taking 2 different people trying to make a character that sounds the same to the audience, that is a challenge. And it's not one that I completely know that we're going to succeed on. So I take that in the spirit that it was meant.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure you're doing a great job.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
It's better than co-writing with that Cooley guy.
Nobody wants to co-write with me. No, never.
Have you ever co-written one with anybody?
Who, me?
Yes, you.
Yeah. So do you like collaborating better, or you like writing by yourself?
I go both ways on it, honestly. I do like collaborating because it's I'm somewhat of an extrovert, and so I'm better, I think, when I can bounce ideas off of other people and run things by them and kind of have them sanity check me and make sure things make sense or don't make sense or whatever. But on the other hand, I like the freedom of writing on my own, where I am the sole arbiter and creatrix of my universe. And, I can say, yeah, this is the way that it is because it is the way it is.
It's good to be God.
That's either you like it or you don't. So that's nice too. I'm trying to, and again, I sometimes fall into a trap, I think, of using collaborations as a bit of a crutch when I feel like I'm really busy and I've got a lot of things to do and I want to get them all done at once. And so I'm like, hey, let me grab a collaborator on this project, because then they can do half the workload and it will be fine. And it does work out that way. But then, I'm not developing enough of my own stuff and my own voice and working, with my own ideas. So I've tried to be better about making sure that I block time to work on my solo projects as well. Because that's the other thing, is when you're collaborating with someone, at least for me, like I feel like I'm letting them down if I'm working on something else. And when I'm working on 5 collaborations, I'm constantly letting 4 people down.
Yeah, that might be a bit extreme. Might be a bit extreme at this point.
So
see where the scheduling would be extreme on something like that.
Yeah, luckily my co-authors are all really, really great people. They're very understanding, and they get that I have the world's most insane schedule imaginable, and that I'm kind of scatterbrained, as you both know, and so yeah.
It's quite the challenge to move from being the one that's writing your own universe to having someone else tell you how things are going to go, tell you when things work, tell you when things don't work. Sure. I've written 13 novels of my own that I've published under my own name. So I'm finally getting into the cadence of being the controller of my own universe. But Glenn Stewart is the primary author on the collaborations. So he can look at the details and go, no. And I have to go, back, and change something.
Right. Yeah. And that's, like when working in the Four Horsemen universe, there was a lot. Mark and Chris gave Maurice and I a lot of leeway to develop this, this cat assassin race of the Depic and their entire planet and their entire societal structure and all of that. So, but at the end of the day, we had to go back to them and say, hey, does this work? Can we include this? Will this break the continuity of your universe? Or does it interfere with any other plans you have for other works in the universe? Because we didn't want to do that either. And I think that it's imperative that authors who are working in someone else's intellectual property, because that's what it is, respect that and make sure you have to have that communication with the creator. Otherwise things fall apart. So
one of the short stories that I wrote in the collaboration in the anthologies involved one of Mark's no-nos. It involved antimatter. Oh my gosh. Trolling him on Facebook about antimatter the entire time that we were that we were doing this, it wasn't in the list of forbidden things like anti-gravity. Anti-gravity was forbidden. Antimatter wasn't on the list. So I made a joke to Chris and said, I should write a story about antimatter. And he says, do it.
Oh.
I said, okay, but I'll do it in a way that is true to your story so that it's an example of why antimatter is not used.
Sure.
And it worked out for what it was.
Yeah, it was a great story.
Mark took it very well. He didn't know what it was going to be until the story was finished. He didn't get to see it. Yeah. But he took it very well. He was very gracious.
Mark is a great guy to work with, and a good friend. And I'm just really privileged that he wanted me to write with him. So,
well, it's been a lot of fun, but we've been talking for almost an hour and a half. So probably we should let you get back to what you're doing, because we can talk. We could just talk.
Well, it's been so much fun, guys. I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much. And I'll come back whenever you want me to. Absolutely.
Why don't you go ahead and tell the viewers where they can find you?
Absolutely. So my website is www.kaceyezell.net. That's KACEYEZELL.net. If you go to my website and sign up for my mailing list, you will receive a link that will allow you to download a PDF of a free short story set in my Psyche of War universe. So if you're curious what this whole psychics and war thing is all about, that is available to you. And in addition, you can find links to all of my books that are on Amazon. I also have an Amazon page under my name, Kacey Ezell. My current works out are, or current novels out anyway, I should say, are Minds of Men, and which was published by Theogony Press, and then Assassin, which was published by Seventh Seal Press. So, and then I have various short stories, both published by Chris Kennedy Publishing and also Baen Books. So all of those links are available via my website or via the Amazon site.
Awesome sauce, folks. Go out and check her out, because I think that you will like what you find.
Oh, and I'm on Facebook. You can find me on Facebook too.
Facebook is always a good thing too. Folks, if you have anything to go ahead and tell us about this episode, go ahead and send us an email at show@deadrobotsociety.com. You can find Paul on Twitter at Paul_E_Cooley. But best of all, go to Facebook. You can find us at the Listeners of the Dead Robot Society Facebook group, where all the writers and listeners of the show go to collaborate and ask their questions. It's a very vibrant community, and you will find something and people that are interesting there for you. You can also, of course, find us on YouTube/DRS Podcast. If you are a patron supporting the show, you can find us on patreon.com/DRS Podcast. And of course, we have to thank the good folks at podhoster.com who have all 492 audio episodes of this show for the last 10 years for your insane listening pleasure. Paul, who are our $10 patrons that are supporting us?
Our $10 patrons at this time, anyway, are Sue, Get Out of My Way or Get Run Over Bayman. JD, I was told this is a tax write-off Barker. Rick, jonesing for a toe tag Shaw. I'll try and fit you in, Rick. Lisa Slack, Sandy Manpants. What?
Sandy Manpants.
That's a phenomenal name.
What the hell?
Make a note. That's going to be a character somewhere. I'm making a note right now.
Wow,
Sandy
that's awesome. On Manatsu, Tracy Bodine, John Kilgallen, Devin Lee, Caleb ain't no candy ass jabronis around here, James. Nathan, if Stu choose shoes, should Stu choose the shoes he choose Petty? Ha! You haven't foiled me yet. Drew, he shoots, he scores, you suck, Bernardi. Wasn't that the Predators goalie that was having that problem game one? Chris Winder, Isabel, you're no longer looking at me cushy. Andre Conde Moraes, DJ Chamberlain, Jonathan Zarusin, and JR, please kill me horribly handily.
He always wants to die.
He actually didn't put that in there. I just know he would if he was paying attention.
Oh, a little editorial markup there. All right, folks, thanks for tuning in, and we hope you have a blast. You guys have a great day.